All right. Is this too loud? You guys hear me in the back? Okay. So a couple things before we get going. Some housekeeping stuff. Let me move this so I'm not sounding like the voice of God. All right. So a couple things before we get going. I don't want to forget them, so I wrote them down. Okay. So what is Thursday? First midterm, right? So today we're primarily just going to be doing a review. I'll field the class for a lot of questions. But before we get going, I've got a couple things that I would like to ask of you and things that you might be concerned about. So, or might need to be aware of. So the first thing is, if you send me an email directly, please either do it through Canvas or include your section in the email, right? It makes it easier for me to, if you're talking about an assignment or a quiz, I don't have to kind of go back and forth to try to search your name. I know exactly what section you're in. So if you're sending me an email directly, please include your section. Unless you're doing it from Canvas, it automatically comes through with what section you're in, okay? Just makes my life a little bit easier. Some other things I wanted to mention that I won't have time to kind of mention probably on Thursday's class in order to kind of give you as much time as possible for the exam. Next week, we will start modules 5 and 6. So I combine those two modules. So the only module reading you will see pop up after Thursday's exam is the module 6 reading, okay? I will have the module 5 reading released to you on Top Hat so that you can view it, but the only one that should show up on Canvas as an assignment is going to be that module 6 reading, okay? So that's the only one that you need to do. That's the only one you can do to earn credit. I'm going to say that again, because if someone tells me I did module 5, I thought that's what we were supposed to do, I can say, I told you in class, you do not need to do module 5. You can look at it, look at the questions, but it's not for points. Module 6 is the only one for points, okay? And that's the one that you need to complete, okay? You might see the other materials for kind of next week, the slides, things like that pop up after the exam. So we're kind of set to go next Tuesday. For the exam, if you're kind of studying, so I will have office hours again tomorrow, 10 to 1. I had quite a few people stop by yesterday, so they get a little bit busy. But you know, if you have some last minute questions, that's a good time to show up and ask them. There are also, and I mentioned this, and it's up in an announcement on Canvas. If you forget, you can kind of go back through. It's called like additional economics tutoring. I said, what nights in Wiley is there additional free tutoring? Wednesday is the one I suggested probably the most helpful, but Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night. Thursday night doesn't really help you for the exam this week, but tonight from 7 to 9 in Wiley, I believe it's 329. You can check my announcement. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down. Yes, 329. So I'm remembering this correctly. Now, it's not specific to this course, so it's kind of first come, first serve, drop in, ask questions, whatever. Usually it's upper level undergraduates who've already taken this course or graduate students. But Tuesday's session, which is from 7 to 9, one of the CL leaders who's worked with me before, I've mentioned I think she's really good. She'll be there, so kind of specific to this class. In fact, if you want to ask for her, I don't think she's in this section, but Lily, and she's really good. So if you want some additional tutoring, it's free. Have some last minute questions Wednesday night. That's a good time to ask. The other thing I wanted to mention, and these changes probably won't occur until tomorrow. I don't think I'll get through them until tomorrow, is that Canvas discussion. So there's some confusion. It wasn't explicitly stated when you open the assignment, but when mentioning the Canvas discussions at the beginning of the semester, as well as kind of explaining it before I posted it that first time, and also in the slides, you need to have an initial post and what else? 2 replies. Somehow, some of you missed that. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess maybe some of that was attendance related, but I don't know, right? I was also the time where I was not here in class, and I would have generally mentioned it along the way, every single class. I wasn't in class that week. So to be fair to everyone, because a lot of people who forgot those responses posted a very well thought out and very long, good descriptive kind of initial post. For this first assignment, as long as you kind of had that initial post with the data in it, I'll go back through, kind of posting that OECD data was one of the other requirements. I'll kind of give you kind of full credit for that first assignment, okay? So don't need to email me if you have and I haven't responded about that. I'm going to go through, and as long as you receive points for that initial response, you'll get the full credit for this first assignment. So it's not going to hurt or help anyone. we're kind of missing that. I don't have to go back through regrade, necessarily everything. Moving forward, I will make sure I explicitly include it in the actual assignment itself as well. But every single Canvas discussion, your initial response or post, usually that's also going to include some type of a use of a data source. The next one we won't have until after the exam, so I'll kind of mention that again in class. Then we will have class, and I'll be mentioning along the way, also reminding you of the 2 responses. But here on out, you need to have your initial post and 2 responses to earn the full credit, okay? So you might see those changes occur if you forgot to do that over the next 24, 48 hours, okay? Other than that, I don't think there's anything else I need to mention here. I put an announcement up yesterday. I put up a second practice exam. So it's just a set of questions that also might be helpful. I tried to do it relatively quickly, and I was kind of moving some things around. In creating the answer key, I bolded. I flipped 2 of the problems. I think it was 9 and 10. I mentioned it in the announcement. So if you downloaded the file Friday, I updated it yesterday so that it kind of has the correct answer on the answer key now for questions 9 and 10. Also, I changed the wording a little bit. I think it was on question 20. I had like a general template, and you probably could have figured it out either way, but I made it a little bit more explicit as opposed to a change. It specifically says increase. So if you've downloaded that file, maybe go back and get the new one because I replaced it yesterday, okay? Other than that, on Thursday's exam, what you will need, something to write with, right? You will also need a calculator that doesn't have graphing capabilities, okay? So, people are asking, what calculator can I use? I generally say a 4 function because then it's a fail-safe, and that's all you should need, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. If you have like a TI 30 or kind of a little scientific calculator that doesn't have graphing capabilities, it just has like a little bar on there so you can only, you might be able to do some like square roots, other things like that. That's okay, right? But if you have a graphing calculator and me or one of the proctors sees it, I'm going to assume, since I'm telling you can't use it, that you're using it nefariously, right? So do not bring a graphing calculator here. Otherwise, I will assume you have ill intent because I'm not dumb. I know how to store things on a graphing calculator like notes, right? And so I know that you can do that. So that's why you're not allowed to use one. So a very basic, as basic of a calculator as you have. And have I asked you to do anything other than, multiplication, maybe take something to a power? I've gotten some questions about the GDP calculation and the equation. You're not going to see that pop up on the practice exams. Probably not going to see it pop up on the midterm, okay? So if you want something to write on, there's plenty of room on the exam itself, right? So it's going to be a 25 multiple choice exam. You'll fill out a Scantron. You're going to turn in the Scantron and the exam, but I don't care if you write on the exam itself, right? Write in the margins. There might be a blank piece sheet on the back. I will also have plenty of blank paper if you really do need some extra. I'll have proctors kind of helping after we get the exams handed out. If you want some extra paper, we'll then kind of hand out some blank sheets of paper if you want it or need it along the way at any point during the exam. Other than that, the other thing that you will need when you turn these in is your ID, right? So when you turn these in to either me or the proctors that are here helping me, you will need to show them your ID so they can match it up to your name so that I don't have anyone taking an exam for someone else, okay? Other than that, make sure you get here prompt early. We will start probably, if it looks like the majority of people here, I might even start a little bit early, right? So to kind of give you as much time as possible. So get here early, be ready to go, 9:35. It'll be kind of a hard kind of cutoff right at the end of class, 10:50, because I've got another section I've got to get things set up for and then kind of ready for them to take the exam as well, okay? Any other logistical questions for me about the exam before we kind of dive into material? You should all have a student ID. I don't know if all of you have a driver's license. So if you can pull it up on your phone when you hand it in, then that's fine. Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for asking. So I mentioned this, I think, early on, but I understand it was a while ago. CL sessions are to review the material that we covered this week. Have we covered new material this week? No. So there won't be CL sessions this Thursday and Monday, right? There's no new material to cover. They'll resume next Thursday and Monday and kind of then so on and so forth. Yep. Nope. You can sit wherever you want. I mean, with 300 people, do you think I can get you guys in the right seats, you know, like I mean, maybe some, I don't know, maybe some professors have a better way of doing it than I am, but like, you know, I've got enough proctors where I'm just wherever you can kind of sit or there's available. It's fine. Any other logistical questions about the exam? Okay. And I'll have some instructions when we get there as well, about, you know, when I've got like a little bubble sheet you fill in, you'll use your user ID name. So whatever comes before that first, you know, first part of your email address, that's what you'll kind of write in as your user ID when we get there, but I'll mention that on Thursday as well. I also am going to edit this real quick because I'm just generally curious. And this is a way for me to kind of actually use this, not with your names attached, don't worry. But I like to use this for my stats class to actually show correlation, causation stuff. So I've got this open for the next 4 minutes. It's just a survey, so it'll pop up here at the very bottom of the homepage on Canvas. Click this midterm number 1, exam number 1 attendance. It's not that you're attending the exam, it's that you're attending. So if we look at it, just that you're attending here the review session today. So are you in the review session right now? Yes or no? Hopefully, if you're here, you know what the answer is, right? Yes. And then I'm gonna look at this. I might even show you guys the results to see how this correlated with exam performance. Spoiler alert, every time I've done this every previous semester, guess what the correlation is? Positive, right? So we'll see if you guys can kind of keep the trend going. So please get on, submit this. It's got to close out in the next 3 minutes. Just access that through the homepage on Canvas. Select yes, select submit, and we'll be kind of good to go, okay? All right, so I will now ask you guys for questions. If I start to not get as many questions, and I'm not trying to be dismissive, if I get a question where I think it won't be worth our time to work through maybe that problem, or I might kind of change the problem a little bit, don't take that as like a slight. I'm probably doing that because I know what I wrote the exam, so I know what's on the exam, and I want this to be as helpful as possible, okay? So I'll ask you guys for questions first, and then we'll kind of go. It can be from anything. I would probably focus on those, either one of those practice exams. Those would be the most useful questions for us to review. I saw your hand first. Which one? Practice exam 1? All right, so why isn't this pulling open for me? Well, we'll pull it up here. So number 3, right? And you see, you know, people are asking me what's going to be on the exam, etc. If you see a question that's on both of the practice exams, what do you think that type of question is likely or unlikely to be on the exam? Pretty likely, right? So if we got this example, and we've done this a lot. We've got 2 individuals. This goes back to module 2. They have how much they can make of 2 different goods using all their resources. We're interested in finding cost, absolute comparative advantage, but then also an economy-wide production possibilities curve. So I might kind of answer 1 and 2 along the way, but I'll show you, like, if you had a set of questions like this, how I would do this on the exam. So what I would do is say, I've got 2 individuals in this economy, okay? Now, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It makes these problems easier if you put the larger value on the y-axis. So I'm going to put green eggs down here on my x-axis, and it doesn't matter. You could solve this either way. I'm going to put kind of t-shirts up here on my y-axis. So I've got Frank and Dennis. I think Frank, using all of his resources, could produce what? 140 t-shirts, 70 green eggs. Dennis, using all of his resources, 120 t-shirts, 40 green eggs, okay? So they each have their own individual production possibilities curve, okay? How would I find the cost of my x-axis good? So what is the cost of 1 green egg? What tells me that for my production possibilities curve? The more responses I get, the quicker we'll go. We'll get more questions. The slope, right, tells me the cost of my x-axis good. So here, what's the slope? Well, the change in y, I've got 140 over 70, or 2 t-shirts for 1 green egg. What about for Dennis? 120 over 40, or it's going to cost him 3 t-shirts, okay? So who has the comparative advantage in green egg production? Frank, okay? He has the lower cost. Now, if I wanted to find the cost of the y-axis good, what would I do? Reciprocal, or it's simply 1 over my slope. So 1/2 and what? 1/3 here. So who has the comparative advantage in t-shirt production? 0.33 is lower than 0.5. So when it comes to comparative advantage, each person will have a comparative advantage in only one good. Now, who has the absolute advantage in t-shirt production? Who can produce more using all the resources? Frank. Who has the absolute advantage in green egg production? Yeah, so you can have an absolute advantage in both goods. But with comparative advantages, because we're doing the reciprocal, you can only have a lower cost in one of these goods. Okay? So I could do this from here. So that would kind of probably help me answer the first two questions. If I then think about what does my economy-wide production possibilities curve look like? Well, if both people are only producing t-shirts, how many total would I have? Yeah, I would take how much each person can produce, add them up, and I get 260, right? Just 140 plus 120 there. What if they're both only producing green eggs? 70 plus 40 gives me 110. Okay? So I can always find these two extreme points relatively easily. There's also one other point I can always find that's going to help me out in these problems. So there's a point here where initially, who am I relying on to produce the x-axis good? Whoever can produce it at a lower cost, which is Frank, right? So initially, my slope will be -2, right, representing the cost to Frank. Now, when Frank has used all of his resources, how many total green eggs will I have? So if he starts to produce green eggs, he gets to this point, he has no more resources. How many green eggs do I have in my economy? Now, at that point, Dennis is the only person producing the y-axis good, so how many t-shirts would I have? 120. So there's this point in the middle, which represents when each person is producing what they have a comparative advantage in. Frank is only producing green eggs. Dennis is only producing t-shirts. Right? Now, if I want more green eggs from that point, who am I going to have to rely on? Dennis. I've already used all Frank's resources. Now my slope becomes -3. Okay? So from here, I've got my economy-wide production possibilities curve. It should be really easy to check those points. So I'll do the easy ones first, and then kind of some of the harder ones. So let's say one of the points on there is 0 green eggs, 260 t-shirts. Is that point on my curve? Yes, that was one of those 3 points. Finding those 3 points might lead you to the correct answer a little bit easier. That's why I'm kind of telling you identifying those 3 is kind of the most important thing with these problems. So that one's not, we're looking for which one's not on the curve. What about 40? No. What about 70, 120? Is that point on my curve? Yep, that point's right here. What about 80, 90? Well, if I wanted 80 green eggs, I'm going to have to rely on who past this point? Dennis, right? The person that had the higher cost. So now, if I want 10 more t-shirts, each one is going to cost me 3 green eggs. How many total green eggs am I giving up? 30. So I'd be left with what? 90. So is the point 80, 90 on my curve? Yes. Well, at this point, I don't even have to check the other one. I know it shouldn't be on the curve if this question's right, but let's check it, right? So what if I had 40, 140? So if I wanted 40 green eggs, what point would be on this curve? Well, if I want 40, the first 40 I'm relying on who? Frank. So if I want 40, each one costs me 2. It's going to be a total of 80 t-shirts as my cost. So I'd be going from what? 260 minus 80 would be 180. Didn't leave myself a lot of room here. Hopefully you left yourself a little more room. So the point 40, 140 is on my curve. So that point of, the point of 40, 180 is on my curve. So the point I was given in the problem, 40, 140 would be where? Somewhere down here. Or what we would call that point. It would be inefficient. Any point under my curve is inefficient. Any point above my curve, we would say is above my curve would be unattainable. I don't have enough resources. Yeah. Not necessarily. We don't really have enough information here to know what the allocated efficient point is. We know every point on the curve will be production efficient. There is only one point that is allocatively efficient. But what is an allocatively efficient point? And kind of to make this point, and maybe a problem, something you might want to think about. So what is the slope if I had like a more continuous production possibilities curve? What does the slope tell me? It tells me the cost of my x-axis good, right? So if I'm graphing out this slope, what's happening to the marginal cost? As I produce more of x, the marginal cost is, if it's getting steeper, the cost is getting higher, right? A steep, more vertical slope, larger value. So my marginal costs are going up, right? Now, what I would need to know in order to identify the allocated efficient point, which I never asked you in any problem here, in terms of like from the PPC, is what else do I need to know? If I'm looking at optimal equilibrium points, allocatively efficient, I'm looking where the marginal cost is equal to my marginal benefit. So I would need to know something about what the marginal benefit is in order to identify what point is allocatively efficient. But I'm not going to, right? We never had anything. I'm not going to push you as far as giving you marginal benefits, have you calculate the marginal cost at every single point, right? I just want you to know that that allocated efficient point, kind of setting us up for looking at equilibriums, is where that marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit. In fact, since all of you are here, maybe something useful for the exam. Let's say I all of a sudden had a technology improvement, okay? And it was only in good X. What's going to happen to my PPC? Is it going to shift outward? A shift outward would mean that technology impacts both goods. Let's say I have a technology change that only impacts X. What's going to happen? If I'm only producing Y, how much can I produce? The exact same amount. But if I'm producing X, I'm going to draw it really egregiously, I can produce way more with this new technology. So at any given point, what's happened to my slope? So if I think about this, what's happening to my slope? It's becoming flatter, which means what's happening to my marginal cost? Decrease. And this makes sense. If I have a new technology, why do we come up with new technologies? Because it makes things more expensive to make? No. They make things cheaper, right? It makes it, we can make things less, it's less expensive to produce things. So what's going to happen to our marginal costs? At every quantity, our marginal costs are now lower after this technology change, which if the marginal benefits have stayed the same, but I now have lower costs, what should happen to my allocated efficient point? It should be at a higher quantity of good X, right? So notice my I didn't even, if I'm thinking here, it would be kind of up here. My allocated efficient quantity of good X should be higher, okay? Any questions on this? I know I kind of went off the problem, but this might be a good thing to know. Wink, wink. Any other questions on this one before we keep moving? Yeah. So the marginal cost isn't increasing, right? If I think about at every single quantity, what's happening to my marginal cost? It's going down. So once we get to module 3, what is increasing? We would think about, because the costs are lower, we're actually seeing an increase in supply. But when we say an increase in supply, we're talking about what's on the x-axis, right? The quantities at every single point are going up, but our costs, if we're thinking about marginal benefits and marginal costs in terms of dollars, our cost at every quantity, it's going to be lower. Yep. Okay. All right, so if we look at, said question 6 on this one. So we've got 2 points. We're thinking about the cost is 1.5. Their current opportunity cost. They wish to decrease production. Okay. So on number 6, yeah. So yeah, if it goes up on the y-axis, what's going to happen at every single point? My slope is going to become steeper. right? So if my slope becomes steeper, what would happen to my marginal cost at every single quantity? It's higher. So what's going to happen? My quantity would go down. Yep. What? We're looking at the costs of good X. No. What did we just say? If I saw a shift or a technology in Y, what's happening to my slope? It's becoming steeper, which means the costs aren't getting lower. The cost of producing X are actually getting higher. So if the costs are getting higher, my marginal costs at every quantity are higher, what's going to happen to the allocative efficient point? It would actually be at a lower quantity of good X. Right? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what does the slope of the production possibilities curve represent? The cost of good X. That's all it tells us. Yep. Okay. All right. So on question 6, right, we have a similar kind of setup where we're looking at two goods. Right. So I think I'm telling you, I told you the cost of a boat. So let's say we've got boats here. I've got jet skis here. Here's my economy-wide production possibilities curve. I'm telling you currently you're at what? 100 boats and 200 jet skis, right? So I'm at some point. And I told you that the opportunity cost of one more boat is 1.5 jet skis. So I know that the slope at this point, if I know the cost of one more boat, that's my x-axis good. And if I'm thinking about if I'm given the cost of something, it probably makes the most sense to put that on the x-axis, because then the slope of my production possibilities curve tells me the cost of that x-axis good. So if my slope here is technically negative 1.5, right? And I ask you, what's the current cost of a jet ski? So if I want the cost of my y-axis good, how do I find that? So if I want the cost of my y-axis good, that is equal to what? 1 over, we already said it in the previous problem, 1 over the slope, right? If I know the slope is 1.5, my cost would be 1 over 1.5, or what? 0.67, if I'm kind of rounding there, okay? So in this problem, I didn't give you actually multiple answers where it was 0.67. You don't even really need to do the rest of it, right? Because if there's only one answer that has the cost of 0.67, I'm done, right? I can identify the correct answer. I don't have to waste time on that second part. Now, if I'm not real confident in that, maybe I want to make sure I check that second part to see, does this make sense? The second part of the only, so what I'm saying here, where it might help you to have these pulled up, because I'm going to have to keep kind of going back and forth. So I found this cost. I'm like, well, let me check. I think I did this part right, but let's make sure the second part makes sense. So if I want to decrease my production of boats, what will happen to the opportunity cost of a boat? So this is where read these questions very carefully. I'll try to bold things on the exam that I think are important, like I don't want you to miss. But right, in this problem, we went from finding the cost of a jet ski. We're now talking about the costs of a boat, right? So we might kind of have, read these carefully. So if I decrease the number of boats I'm producing on this production possibilities curve, which way am I moving? Yeah, I want fewer boats, right? I'll just come up with some hypothetical values here. I don't know, this would be like what, 250 or something? What's going to happen to the slope as I move kind of up that production possibilities curve? It's becoming flatter. So if it helps me, sometimes like directional changes can be like tricky, or you can get it mixed up in your head. If I can see that this is becoming flatter, that means the slope is going to be what? A higher or lower value? Lower. So let me just put a number to that. If it's a lower value, it might be something like, I don't know, 1, right? Okay, well, what's happened now? That slope tells me the cost of a boat. So by producing fewer boats, what's happened to the cost of the last boat I produced? It is now lower or has decreased from what it was before, right? It's went from 1.5 to 1 or 1.5, something lower, right? Because that slope is flatter, okay? So this is where some people ask, should I be drawing, am I gonna have to, well, it's a multiple choice exam. You don't have to draw anything out if you don't want to, but I think almost every single problem, there's probably at least an equation or some kind of a graph you can draw that helps lead you to the correct answer, okay? Any questions on this one? So good for us. We just said the cost decreases. So the second part of that answer makes sense. So, okay, we're thinking about this the right way, okay? Any other questions people want to see here? Yeah. Yep. So if we're looking at number 9, right, we're starting to think about kind of getting to module 3 stuff now. So here we've got what? I think simultaneous shifts. So these are some trickier ones, right? And I can guarantee you'll see a simultaneous shift problem on the exam. What is true if I'm asking you about the change to the equilibrium quantity and price? When I have simultaneous shifts, one thing will always be what? Indeterminate. So hopefully if I'm looking at this, okay, I wasn't nice on this one. Every answer has something that's indeterminate. But let's say, for example, I had said something like, oh, it's not going to let me edit this now. Okay, well. All right, well, let's say I had said this was a decrease, right? Well, I could rule that answer out right away. I know something has to be indeterminate, okay? So here I've got 2 changes. The way that I would do these is I would draw each change individually. So we're going to have kind of 2 things going on. So the first thing, so if I'm thinking about any good, and here we're looking at what? Gas. So I've got the price, got quantity. Demand should be downward sloping. My supply is going to be upward sloping, right? I can kind of think about, here's my initial equilibriums, right? Just where this market starts out. I tried to draw these at the same point. So the first thing we had was, I've got an increase in the population. So this is the increase in the number of consumers. So anytime I see the word consumer, what curve should I be thinking about? Demand. Anytime I see the word producer or production, I should be thinking about. So right away, I know I should be drawing a shift in my demand curve, right? So if I have more consumers, if everything else stays the same, am I going to see demand go up or down for a product? If I'm in Bloomington and I don't know, have a restaurant, and all of a sudden the population doubles in size, do you think I'm happy about that? Yes, right? Why? Because I have more people that are likely going to want to come to my restaurant. Anytime we have more consumers, we should see an increase in demand. Anytime we see an increase in either supply or demand, that's going to be a rightward shift. If you have a decrease in supply or demand, that's going to be a leftward shift. The reason why is because you can think about, if I'm increasing something, I'm moving away from 0, right? If I see a decrease, I'm moving closer to 0. So if I have an increase in demand from more consumers, that's going to be a rightward shift, right? So here I've got my second demand curve. I'll start using green instead of blue. This is a little bit deeper of a blue than I thought. So my equilibrium quantity and price will do what? Increase. So I've got this demand increase. It caused my equilibrium quantity and price to go up. Everybody with me on that one? Okay. Now the second thing I had was, oh, did this one not have? Oh, I did the second thing first. Sorry. The first thing that changed was an increase in the input costs. Okay. So, you know, maybe I do something a little bit different here. So if I have this one's, I think, pretty easy actually. If I see an increase in the cost of producing something, are people going to want to produce more or less? Or are companies less, right? It's more expensive. I'm not going to be able to produce as much as before. So maybe I have something instead like, oh, I don't know, a good one I like to use. What else would increase the cost of producing something that the government can do? So if I tax producers, or I use tariffs, or something like that, what's going to happen to my supply curve? I've increased the cost, so my supply curve will decrease, okay? If my supply curve decreases, that's a movement towards 0, or a shift to the left. what would happen to my equilibrium? Kind of ran out of room there a little bit. Price and quantity. Quantity would go down. Didn't leave myself room here, but price is going up, right? So that supply decrease caused my quantity to go down and my price to go up. So if both of these things happen at the same time, what is my total effect going to be? Well, price is definitely going to do what? If both of them are pushing the price up, I know my price is going to go up. If they're pushing the quantity in opposite directions, what's going to happen to quantity? I would need more information. I would need to know which one of these shifts was larger, right? If the demand shift was larger, quantity will go up. If the supply shift was larger, quantity would go down. But you haven't seen problems like that where I give you the size of the changes. Generally, I kind of leave it, make it easier that if they push it in opposite directions, we just say that the change is indeterminate. Okay, we don't know, or we can't. I think it said cannot determine here, because I know that word of indeterminate is kind of weird, right? So cannot determine or indeterminate would be kind of our answer here. Okay. Any questions on this? And just to be clear, depending on the combination of shifts we have, we don't know what's going to be indeterminate. Could be price, could be quantity. So we actually have to kind of work these out. I would not put these on the same graph, because if you put them on the same graph, how large you draw each shift could lead you to thinking that both of these things go up or down or vice versa, right? So drawing them out individually, using this shorthand, if you don't like to use arrows, use like a positive and a negative change, whatever makes the most sense to you. I think arrows, for me, just allows me to see the directional changes pretty easily. I think that usually lines up with most people's way of thinking, okay? Any other problems on this, or any questions on this one before we keep moving? Any other problems we want to see? All right, so if we look at 14. Okay, so we didn't explicitly talk as much about this one, but if we are thinking about surpluses and shortages, we're thinking about if a market wasn't in equilibrium, what could be true? So at equilibrium, quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. If the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, that means more people want to buy it than what is currently out there. What would you call that? A shortage. If the quantity supplied is larger than the quantity demanded, we have more units than people want to buy, we would have a surplus. So if I'm looking at a price of $20 here, and this is where we didn't use this term of price ceiling, so I was using old questions, different semesters, we go through slightly different order of things. I would probably just tell you, let's just assume they set the price at 20. That's how I would phrase it on the exam. So a price ceiling is just the government's coming in and setting this price at 20. So if I'm setting the price at 20, what's my quantity supplied? So quantity supplied and quantity demanded is not the entire supply or demand curve, it's one specific point. So at a price of 20, my quantity supplied is 40, but at that same price, my quantity demanded is 120. So if my quantity supplied is 40, my quantity demanded was 120. If the quantity supplied is less than my quantity demanded, more people want to buy this good than what is out there, we said we would have a shortage, right? What would have to be true if I wanted a surplus? The price would have to be what? The quantity supplied would have to be greater than the quantity demanded. What's the only prices where that's true, where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded? It would have to be a price above what? That equilibrium point, right? So if I have any price that's above the equilibrium, that quantity demanded is less than my quantity supplied. So if I ever have the quantity demanded being less than my quantity supplied, there I'm going to have more units on the market than people want to buy. I would say I have a surplus. Okay. Any questions on that one? Let me make sure we keep got 30 minutes left. So, any other questions people want to see worked through here? Yeah. 10? So if we're looking at 10, yeah, okay. So I can also, once again, pick up on trends and patterns. If you've seen this type of question on the practice problems for Module 3, did you see it on the quiz for Module 3? Do you see it on both of the practice exams for Module 3? What do you think is probably going to be true? It's going to be on the exam, right? I don't have to tell you what's going to be on the exam. I'm trying to kind of tell you with these materials I'm giving you. So we've got two equations here. Now I might be a little bit harder on the exam here. Let's say instead, so I put here quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Let's say I just gave you two equations and the order didn't, like I didn't tell you which one was which. Why do you know that top equation is for demand? Demand is always going to be what? Downward sloping. So we know the slope will always be negative. So when I give you these two equations, even if I don't tell you which one is supply and demand, the supply equation will always have a positive slope, and the demand equation will always have a negative slope. So when I'm thinking about finding marginal costs and marginal benefits, right? If I've got what? I had my demand equation was price is equal to 160 minus 3Q. Okay. If I'm thinking about my demand equation visually, I said at every quantity, what does price reflect? Or what does the demand curve reflect? The marginal benefit of that unit. As I buy more of something, what's happening to the marginal benefit? It is going down, right? The first car, huge marginal benefit to my life. The second, still good, but not as large as the first, right? And then the third, it just kind of sits in the garage. It's not near as large as kind of that first one that allowed me to kind of get around town, right? So if I've got demand is representing marginal benefit, I can think about this demand equation. Price is really telling me the marginal benefit of whatever unit I'm interested in. So I know you asked about 10, but problem 11, actually, I'll change problem 11 a little bit. Let's say I wanted to know instead of the marginal cost of the third unit, what's the marginal benefit? What would I do here? Simply plug in that quantity I'm interested in. 160 minus 3 times 3 would give me what? 151, right? So the marginal benefit of the third unit would be 151. Now, what if instead I was thinking about my supply curve? Supply represents what? The producer's marginal costs. So if I have my supply equation, which was 20 plus 4Q, that price is reflecting to me the producer's marginal cost. So if I want to know the marginal cost of the third unit, all I do is plug a 3 into that supply equation, and I get that the marginal cost is equal to what? 32, if I'm doing math in my head correct here. Okay. So I can find marginal costs and marginal benefits by simply plugging in quantity into that supply or demand equation. Okay. Any questions there? Now, another question that you will likely then see, and maybe I don't give you, maybe I only ask you one of these, right? Marginal cost or marginal benefit, but I can almost guarantee, well, I say almost, I can guarantee you. What am I thinking about when I'm looking for the equilibrium? So I think the next problem probably asks you, what is the equilibrium price and quantity? Okay. Well, how would I find those equilibrium? It's where supply is equal to demand, or where the marginal cost of the last unit is the exact same as the marginal benefit. Right? So how would I do that? Well, I have two equations. I want to know where they're equal to each other. What would I do? I would simply set my equations equal to each other. So what's my demand equation? 160 minus 3Q. What's my supply equation? 20 plus 4Q, right? And the reason why I can kind of drop that quantity demanded or quantity supplied is because I know if I'm looking for the equilibrium, quantity demanded should be the same as quantity supplied. So I can just treat them as kind of the same variable. So now it's just a little bit of algebra, right? So I subtract 20 from both sides. I add 3Q to both sides. I get what? 140 is equal to 7Q divide both sides by 7, and I get what? Quantity is equal to 20. So my equilibrium quantity here, I just set those two equations equal to each other, solve for that equilibrium quantity. How would I then find the equilibrium price? I could actually do two things. Take that quantity and plug it into either equation. Hopefully, maybe this is a good way to check your algebra or check your work. If I plug it into both, I should get the same answer. So let's try demand first, right? So if I want to plug in, right, 160 minus 3 times that equilibrium quantity of 20, I get what? This is 60, so 100. If I plug it into my supply equation, I get what? 20 plus 4 times 20, I get 100. Sure enough, I end up finding the exact same price, no matter if I plug it in either one, which should be the case if I have correctly identified that equilibrium point. The equilibrium quantity should be the same as the equilibrium price, okay? So get comfortable doing this kind of level of algebra because you will see a problem like this on the exam, okay? Any questions on this one before we keep moving? Okay. Also, just some test taking skill kind of things, which like, if I look at these answers, and let's say I'm pretty confident in my algebra, I think that I found 20 correct, what do I know the right answer is? If I'm concerned about time, what I would do is put a mark next to A, thinking this is probably their answer, and then put however you want to mark it, like maybe I want to come back to this question if I have time. I'm pretty confident that I solved for the quantity correct, but if I have time, I just want to check to make sure I can getting that equilibrium price of 100, plugging it back into the supplier. Now, that won't always be the case. Sometimes, right, I'll have 2 or even 3 answers with the same quantity, right? So you would actually have to kind of work through the complete problem. But sometimes if, working through if there's a 2-part question, if I'm pretty confident in one part and I am concerned about time, maybe I could kind of mark it and then kind of move on and come back if I have time. It's just, everyone's different. That's, I don't know, a test taking thing that I would maybe, not just for this class, but like other classes as well. Okay. Any other questions people wanted to see worked through? Yeah. So question 2. So if I'm choosing 3 hours and I'm instead choosing 2 now, what's most likely to be true? So once again, how are we making choices about what the optimal number, or even when we get to the markets, thinking about kind of the equilibrium of a market is, right? We're looking at what? Where the marginal benefit, we choose to do something as long as the marginal benefit is what? Greater than or equal to the marginal cost. So my marginal costs are increasing. So this is like module 1 stuff. We already started really kind of setting up what markets will look like. It's just once we got to markets, marginal costs and marginal benefits represented supply and demand curves. So if I'm currently choosing 3 hours, right? So I've got 4 answers here. It's total benefits are going up or down, total costs are going up or down, marginal costs are going up or down, or marginal benefits are going. Like those are the only kind of possible answers I could give you here. If total benefits change, does that necessarily tell me about where my optimal point is going to be? How am I choosing the optimal point? Where my marginal benefit is equal to my marginal cost, right? Going up to that point. So what's going to change the optimal number of hours for me to study? Changes in the, what's on the graph here? Marginal. We make decisions based not off of totals, based off of the margin, right? So marginal costs or marginal benefits would have to change. So let's say marginal benefits went up. Well, this is where sometimes don't get too lost in the weeds. If marginal benefits, the additional benefit you're getting from doing something goes up, are you going to do more or less of it? So would that change the number of hours you study from 3 to 2? No. In fact, you could think about it, if marginal benefits are getting higher at every single point, or I'm kind of seeing this increase in my marginal benefits, that would actually lead me to thinking about a higher quantity of hours study. So the other thing that we had, the only other marginal change was told us was a marginal cost increase. Once again, don't get too lost sometimes in the graph. It's good to be able to draw them, but if the costs, the additional cost of doing something goes up, are you going to do more or less of it? So are you going to study more or less than 3 hours? So am I more likely to study 2 hours? Yeah. If my costs go up, that means that every quantity, my costs are now higher, right? So I've got my new kind of equilibrium point would maybe be at hours of 2 or 2.5, right? I'm giving you a specific value of 2 to kind of think about this, but you could in general just say that if the marginal costs increase to doing something, you know the optimal point, the allocated efficient point, the equilibrium, all words that we kind of mean the same thing just in different contexts, is going to move or decrease or kind of move to the left there. Okay? So marginal costs increasing would lead to us kind of studying fewer hours in that problem. Any other questions people want to see worked through? We're all going to ace the final? Or the final? The midterm? Both, right? So let me think of one that people haven't. We haven't really touched on elasticities. I know it's the most recent stuff we've done, but I think there's probably one that is tricky that I want people to kind of think about here. All right, let's do 22 on practice exam 2 because it allows us to kind of hit a bunch of different concepts at once, okay? So let's say I tell you where the unit elastic portion of the demand curve is, okay? So if I'm drawing out my demand curve, looking at different quantities of a good, if I had to kind of give like where the unit elastic part is, how would you describe usually like where that would be at in the demand curve? Somewhere in the middle, right? Now, why do you know? So here I'm telling you from 25 to 24, this is my unit elastic point, which means the elasticity of demand would be what? If it's unit elastic, it's equal to the percentage change. Remember, my elasticity of demand is the percentage change in the quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. So this would mean that they're the exact same value. We said as we move down the demand curve, demand is becoming more what? So yeah, so you can kind of think about it this way, like, I don't know, maybe this makes sense or not. If it's becoming more inelastic, what is the elasticity value getting closer to? The lowest possible elasticity we could see is that people aren't responding at all, which would be a value of. So if I'm moving down the demand curve, I'm getting closer to 0, which means demand is becoming more inelastic, right? If I move up the demand curve, right, that means my elasticity is getting larger, which means people are more responsive. So above that unit elastic point, this portion of my demand curve we would say is elastic. So in this problem, I'm told if I'm at currently a price of 40. So this is where I don't have to graph this out, but it helps me a lot to have this visual. Because if I'm at a price of 40 currently, what point am I at on my demand curve? Elastic, right? And this is where I might remember, like, you can kind of write out like a table. I think some people told me, some of the CL leaders, I might have given them like a little table, like a summary you can write out. And that could be helpful. So, if you really wanted to, if that's how you kind of learn, I don't think it's probably the best way to just memorize these things. But like if I had elastic or inelastic demand, and I'm thinking about a price increase or a price decrease, if it's elastic and I'm increasing the prices, and I'll show you here why in a second, this would decrease my total revenues. If I decrease the prices, this increases total revenues. If I'm instead on the inelastic portion, increasing the price has the exact opposite effect. So we'll kind of think through why in a second. If this table is helpful to you, use it. I don't know. It's very easy to kind of not remember this when it's not in front of you on an exam. So what I would be able to do, and it might be a little bit easier for some of you, and once again, everyone's different. So you've got to be honest with yourself about what the best way you will kind of remember things or learn is. So a general rule of thumb that might summarize this table and make it easier is when are total revenues increasing? If I'm moving towards what point? This unit elastic point. So we said that if we stack these graphs and think about what is the total revenue at each one of these quantities, for the unit elastic point, we said this is where total revenue is maximized. If I move in either direction, so moving quantity in either direction, my total revenues are declining. So if I'm on the elastic portion and all of a sudden I see a decrease in the price, so if I lower the price, I'm moving towards the unit elastic point, what should happen to my total revenues? Doesn't matter which side I'm on, if I'm moving towards the unit elastic point, my total revenues should be getting closer to the maximum possible value, so they should be going up. Or think about it this way. If I started at a price of 40, I then lower the price, I don't know, maybe it's 30 or something. At this new quantity, I'm closer to that unit elastic point, my total revenues have went up, right? So the answer to this question would be, we know we're on the elastic portion because we're at a price that's above the unit elastic prices, or the prices that would give us the unit elastic portion. As I lower the price or move towards that unit elastic point, I know my total revenues must be getting higher. Now I could change this problem. If I instead said that the prices were increasing, what's going to happen to my total revenues? Well, now I'm moving to a point that's further away from the unit elastic point. My total revenues would be going down, right? And that's just kind of what this table had summarized. And then the exact opposite, if we're on the inelastic portion, we want to move towards the unit elastic point, we would actually need to increase our prices. And if we move away from it, we're lowering prices, kind of moving down that total revenue curve. So if this visual kind of helped, this will always be kind of the same relationship. I kind of mentioned how we can remember that the fact that it starts out as elastic becomes more and more inelastic, right? As the demand curve gets lower and lower, we're thinking about we're getting closer and closer to zero, which means it's more and more inelastic. It's a good way to remember the inelastic portion is on the bottom part. Yeah, so I think some people, this is a good question. It's really a similar idea. We just said if it's elastic, what do I actually want to do? To increase my total revenues, I'd want to do what? Lower the price. So let's think about perfectly elastic and see if that would kind of hold true. So if I have a perfectly elastic demand curve, that means technically it's infinite, right? So if I'm thinking about my percentage change in the quantity demanded over my percentage change in price, it's hard to think about infinity. So maybe just think about like a really, really large number, right? So like, let's say the percent change in quantity demanded was like 1,000,000%. And that came from the smallest 1% change in price, right? Well, there's another way of kind of thinking about total revenues and elasticity is if my total revenue is simply the price I'm charging times the quantity I'm selling, when demand is perfectly inelastic, this doesn't have to be 1. This could be 0.000000001. The smallest kind of increase in price would do what? If people are completely responsive, if you change the price just a little bit, what will their quantity demanded go to? All the way down to 0, an infinite decrease. So if I see an infinite kind of decrease, or this quantity goes to 0, what's my new total revenue? Anything times 0 would be 0. So if it's perfectly elastic, if I increase the price just a little bit, not only does total revenue decrease, it goes all the way to 0. Yeah, if I had a perfectly elastic demand curve, the smallest, well, and I mean, there we have to complicate our models. We're in a very simplistic model. Obviously, like there's a limit on how much money people have to spend. But if I did increase the price and people were like perfectly elastic, sorry, if I lowered the price and people were perfectly elastic, how much more do they buy? everything I've got, right? So it wouldn't, in practice, it won't be technically an infinite quantity, but what quantity would it be? Everything that I have. So there, what's going to definitely happen? I lowered the price by an infinitesimally small amount. I sold every single unit I have. My total revenue is definitely going to go up. Yep. So the same principles would apply if it was perfectly elastic. But if it's harder to think about infinite, like the questions, you really could answer if you just think about it being a really large value. It might make it easier, in fact, to think about it as a really large value. Okay. Any other questions people want to see worked through? It'll be increase or decrease. I think that was the one that I changed on the second practice exam when I uploaded it. So I have like a template. You guys don't care about this. I have like a bunch of template questions where I can change things in them. So I might put change, and then when I use it on the exam, I put increase or decrease. I forgot to change it when I put it on the practice exam. Change when I put on the practice exam. So yeah, you'll know whether or not it's an increase or a decrease in price. Yep. And once again, the document should now be updated. I think I changed it to increase on this second practice. Well, we can look. 20, yeah, I changed it to increase instead of the word change. Yep. All right, so we've got quantity supplied, quantity demanded, and we have changes in price, okay? So this problem tells us that there is a marker that doesn't work. So if the percentage change in quantity is 20%, I then told you that the percentage change in the quantity supplied is that it goes up by 40, and the percentage change in my quantity demanded goes down by 5%. So if I'm thinking about calculating elasticities, and this applies to our cross price, our income, we didn't talk about an elasticity. Every elasticity we talked about, what was in our numerator? If you look at them, there's a pattern. If I look at the elasticity of demand, it's the percentage change in my quantity demanded from a percentage change in price. If I think about my elasticity of supply, it's a percentage change in the quantity supplied over the percentage change in price. Even if we look at something like our income elasticity, it was a percentage change in the quantity demanded, just it was responding not to price changes, but income changes, right? So what was always in our numerator? Quantity. Every elasticity we talked about, it's quantity, okay? So to not mix these up, every single elasticity, you should have that quantity in the numerator, okay? So at this point, it's just a matter of plugging my values in, right? So my elasticity of demand, I had what? -5, nope, I'm sorry. Yeah, -5 over 20. So this would be what? -0.25. Now, this is where I'm not going to try to trick you. There was a question on module 4, in fact. I tried to tell you, I got a couple emails to include the negative sign just because that's the way that I had to create the quiz. There was a formula behind it where it made it negative. So I told you to include the negative sign. Technically, the price elasticity of demand will always be negative. On no problem will I give you an option, though, where it is negative or positive. The reason why we take the absolute value is because in a problem like this, when we talk about is it elastic or inelastic, we want to compare it, is it above or below 1, right? So here, in absolute terms, this would be 0.25. This is less than 1, so we would say demand is what? Less than 1 means it's inelastic. Supply, we plug in our values here, we get what? 2. It's above 1, so supply here would be elastic. Right? So at the same kind of percent change in price, we could have demand or supply be both elastic, both inelastic, one on the other, one elastic, one inelastic. That doesn't really, there's no, depends on what the numbers are. Okay. Questions on this before we keep moving? Okay. In fact, we can talk about elasticities to anything. So, well, I won't waste time. Do we have any other questions? I want to see work through. Yeah. Yeah, so when we talk about demand, it's always negative. So we didn't really, right? We didn't care necessarily. That's why we could take the absolute value. When we're looking at income or cross price elasticities, we care about the sign because the sign tells us what? Whether or not they're normal or inferior goods, or whether or not they're substitutes or complements, right? So if I wanted to look at a cross price elasticity, what's in my numerator? The percentage change. I just said it's always quantity. Now here we're looking at the quantity of good X, and how is it responding to a percentage change in the price of good Y? Okay. So we said if we have substitutes, if the price of Y goes up, or we have a positive change, what would happen to the quantity demanded for good X? If I can buy Pepsi or Coke, once again, when we're thinking about substitutes or complements or normal or inferior, find goods that make sense to you. I can give you a bunch of examples, but like think of two things to you that are definitely substitutes, right? I don't know. Usually it's like two different brands is the easiest way to think about it. So if Pepsi becomes more expensive, what's going to happen to the demand for Coke? It's going to go up, right? Or we would say a positive change. So what's going to be true? I would have a positive over a positive. Anytime my cross price elasticity is positive, I've got substitute goods. If I've got complementary goods, when the price of this Y good goes up, the one I always use because it's universal to everybody, it's not, some people don't eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, so those aren't peanut butter and jelly aren't complements, or you can choose any two goods. Anything that requires batteries, and batteries are definitely complements, right? So if the price of batteries goes up, what's going to happen to anything that requires batteries? The demand will go down, right? So here I've got a positive and a negative change. If I've got a positive over a negative, this is going to be a negative value. Anytime my cross price elasticity is negative, I've got complementary goods. Okay? Questions on this idea? And then kind of as just a quick one, if I'm doing income elasticities, what's always in my numerator? Quantity, right? And it's coming from a percentage change in now not prices, but income. So I can think about, I've got two types of goods. And this is where generally I'm going to tell you what the sign of that income or cross price elasticity is, but maybe starting out thinking about, okay, if they were normal goods, what would these changes look like? Might be easier for you to kind of think about and solve these. So if all of a sudden I see my income goes up, and as a result, I buy more of something, that's most things. Clothes, food, number of, I don't know, online subscriptions to things. When you have more money, you generally buy like Conor McGregor, just more of everything, right? And so anytime income and quantity demand move in the same direction, you're going to have a what? Positive over a positive. So if my income elasticity is positive, I've got normal goods. If I ever see that when my income goes up, I actually see demand go down, that must mean when I have more money, I didn't really want to be buying this good to begin with, right? I was only buying public transportation because I didn't have enough money to afford a car. Or I was only buying ramen noodles because I couldn't afford, steak or whatever, crab, whatever higher quality foods are. So here I would have a positive over a negative, making my income elasticity what? So I've got positive over negative would be a negative value. That tells me that it's an inferior good. Now that one's a little bit easier because you can think about negative income elasticity, inferior good, right? Positive income elasticity, just a normal good that we would typically see. So I could give you, I think I know what you're asking. So it doesn't necessarily have to be for the price elasticity of demand. I could give you an income elasticity of demand, like I think in problem 18 on practice exam 2, where you might have to use the midpoint method, right? So if I want a percentage change, the percentage change in anything is just looking at what is the actual change and then dividing it by what? the average. So when you have like that huge midpoint method formula, I got people asking me like, are you going to get a form? We're not going to have any formula sheets, but you can remember as long as I've got this idea down that I want the percent change in quantity over the percent change in income, I can break this down and kind of do this by parts. What would this be? It's just the change in quantity over my average quantity. Hopefully, we can find the difference between two numbers. That's a change. And then dividing it, how do I find the average of two numbers? I add them up and divide by 2. So that's all that formula was saying, right? And like I said, this is, a basic level of mathematics that I don't think you need a formula sheet to remember how to find a change in an average, right? How would I find, if it's income, instead of like the price for price elastic demand, I would just be looking at what? The change in income dividing by my average, right? So no matter what percent change you're looking for, it's just the change divided by the average, okay? Any other questions? We got about 5 minutes left here. People want to see work through. Good. Okay. All right. So to go with this elasticity one, I had someone email me. We can actually think about elasticities of anything, right? So all these elasticities, I was thinking about this like, this will kind of apply to the exam here. So if I had like the elasticity, and let's say, could actually do like quantities in both. So let's say I had the change in percent change in hours studied, and here I had the percent change in my grade on the exam, right? What do I hope this elasticity is? So I want my improvement in my grade to be really responsive to how much I'm studying. So I really hope that price or the hours studied elasticity of my grade in the exam is elastic, right? So we can think about, because that would mean it's really responsive to the time I'm putting in. Just like I want these goods to be really responsive. If I see a small increase in income and all of a sudden people buy way more of my product, I love that as a company, right? Or price elasticity of supply. If I lower that, then we get on the opposite. If I am a supplier, what do I hope the price elasticity of supply is? When I increase the price, I hope that people do what? Buy a lot less, or sorry, buy a lot more or a lot less. Or if I decrease the price and I'm selling something, do I hope people increase how much they buy by a lot or a little? So there, they also want price elasticity of supply to be really, or price elasticity of demand, sorry, to be really large, right? Companies hope that this price elasticity of demand is really large because then small changes in price lead to really large changes in that quantity demanded, okay? But that is one thing I don't think I mentioned this last week that kind of helps, is that way you don't have to, like, when you're memorizing equations, you don't have to memorize every single elasticity equation. What's always in your numerator will always be the percentage change in quantity, right? For all the elasticities we looked at, that's always what it's going to be, okay? Any other last minute logistical questions or anything for the exam? Okay. So once again, I have office hours tomorrow, 10 to 1. I'll be over in my office in Wiley. If you want to meet via Zoom, you'll have to email me. I can kind of set up a time. I'll send you a link. Other than that, good luck studying, and I will see you guys Thursday for the exam.